The hum of the jet bridge, the soft purr of distant engines, and the muffled voices of excited travelers blended into a low, steady symphony as Nyla Robinson stepped aboard Flight 3260. At 12 years old, her hands were steady, but her heart was alight, fluttering with something fragile and dazzling. It was her very first time in first class. She wasn't alone. Seated beside her, clutching the strap of his tiny backpack like it was a lifeline, was her 8-year-old brother, Malik. They had both worked hard for this, harder than most kids their age ever had to. Their father, Samuel Robinson, had promised them a reward if they made the honor roll. Not just any reward, a real flight, first class no less, to New York City. The kind of thing other kids at school only saw in movies. Nyla and Malik didn't grow up spoiled. Their father, despite his enormous success, had raised them with rules, structure, and a deep belief in earning what you receive. And today, they had earned this. Nyla gently placed her sketchpad on the seat tray and looked out the large oval window. On the tarmac below, orange-vested workers guided luggage carts and refueled planes in a fluid choreography she'd only seen behind security glass. Never this close. Malik leaned toward the window, too, his wide eyes darting with curiosity, cheeks puffed with wonder. "Look, Nyla," he whispered, pressing his fingers against the cool glass. "That plane's bigger than our house." She smiled softly. "I know, right? It's beautiful." Their row was near the front of the cabin, where everything smelled like polished leather and quiet money. The cream-colored seats were wide enough for both of them to sink into, the kind of comfort that seemed to embrace you back. Tucked beside Malik's seat was a blanket folded with almost ceremonial care. Complimentary headphones lay in a plastic case on his armrest. Even the magazines in the seat pocket had a crispness that whispered luxury. Nyla felt the weight of it, the moment, the space, the silence. She'd read stories about first class, watched clips online, but nothing quite prepared her for how different it felt, how it demanded you to sit straighter, speak softer. She adjusted the collar of her denim jacket, feeling suddenly unsure if she belonged. Malik, on the other hand, had no such reservations. He wiggled in his seat, legs too short to touch the floor, then looked at her. "I'm thirsty," he whispered. "Do you think we can ask for water now?" She hesitated, then smiled gently. "Let's wait until we take off, okay? They'll bring drinks soon." He nodded and went back to peering out the window, content, for now. Across the aisle, a man in a charcoal business suit was already typing away on a laptop, his brows furrowed in intense focus. Beside him, a woman wearing pearls sipped sparkling water from a glass that caught the light like crystal. One of the flight attendants, tall, graceful, older, glided down the aisle, stopping to chat with passengers, offering soft smiles and nods. Her name tag read Claire. There was something almost regal about the way she carried herself. Not just the uniform, neatly pressed, impeccably tailored, but the way she seemed to own the air around her. Nyla watched as Claire offered a gentle pat to an elderly gentleman's shoulder, then turned to another passenger with a joke that earned a polite chuckle. She was practiced, polished, professional. When she reached Nyla and Malik's row, however, that smile faltered. Just a fraction, barely noticeable, unless you were looking. Nyla was. Claire glanced at them, her eyes pausing just long enough to assess before she nodded curtly and moved on without a word. Nyla didn't react. Not yet. But something in her chest tugged. Minutes passed. Passengers continued boarding. Malik shifted again. "I'm still thirsty," he murmured. "Please, Nyla." She nodded. Reaching up, she pressed the small silver button above her seat. A soft chime followed. Several rows ahead, Claire turned her head slightly toward the sound and didn't move. Nyla waited. 5 seconds. 10. 20. Nothing. She pressed it again, more hesitantly this time. The light illuminated again. Claire was now chatting with the couple in row 1, pouring white wine with a poised hand and an easy smile. Nyla lowered her hand slowly. "We'll wait a little longer," she told Malik gently. He tried to hide his disappointment, twisting the hem of his hoodie in his lap. Just then another attendant, Elena Torres younger, warm-eyed, passed nearby. Nyla caught her gaze. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Could my brother have some water, please? He's thirsty." Elena paused, a moment of recognition flickering in her face. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Claire appeared beside her. "I'll handle this," Claire said flatly, then turned to Nyla and Malik. "We haven't started beverage service yet. You'll have to wait." Her voice wasn't rude, not exactly, but it was cold, absent of the courtesy she had just bestowed upon other passengers. With that, she turned on her heel and disappeared down the aisle. Malik looked up at his sister, confused. "Did we do something wrong?" Nyla swallowed hard, her face carefully neutral. "No," she said gently. "We didn't do anything wrong." But inside, her heart was beginning to drum faster, because this wasn't just about water, and deep down, she already knew it. The gentle vibration of the aircraft as it taxied toward the runway was oddly soothing, but Nyla Robinson felt anything but soothed. She sat rigid in her plush seat, hands clasped in her lap, pretending not to notice the growing tension in her chest. Beside her, Malik had grown quiet. His earlier excitement had dimmed into a silence that Nyla recognized all too well. Not from this flight, but from other places, other moments. The kind where something was wrong, but no one would say it. From across the aisle, the soft clinks of glass echoed again. Claire, the head flight attendant, moved easily down the cabin, distributing drinks with practiced elegance. Sparkling wine, juices, even bottled water. Her voice was calm, her smile intact. Just not for them. Nyla watched carefully, trying not to be obvious, trying not to make it into something. But the truth was becoming harder to swallow than the dryness in Malik's throat. She leaned toward him and whispered, "I'll try again." Malik nodded, his small fingers drumming nervously against the armrest. Nyla pressed the call button once more. The light blinked above their heads. Seconds later, Claire appeared. This time there was no pretense of kindness. "Yes?" she asked, her tone clipped. "My brother is still thirsty," Nyla said, keeping her voice calm, measured. "Could he please have a glass of water?" Claire's lips pressed into a line. "I already told you, beverage service hasn't officially started. You'll need to wait," she said flatly before turning away. No apology, no offer of a time, just a firm dismissal. Nyla sat frozen for a moment, stunned not just by the refusal, but by the way it was delivered. She had been polite repeatedly. She had followed every unspoken rule of being respectable. And still, they were denied what others received freely and warmly. It wasn't about the water anymore. It was about the message, "You don't belong here." She felt the tears rise unbidden, but refused to let them fall. Instead, she turned to Malik and smiled gently, forcing a calm she didn't feel. "She said we'll have to wait a little longer," she whispered. Malik gave a small nod, but his disappointment showed in the way his body curled slightly inward, like he wanted to disappear into the seat. Behind them, a few rows back, a low voice spoke. "She's been serving drinks for 10 minutes now." Nyla turned slightly. A man, older, silver-haired, wearing a navy blue blazer, had spoken to no one in particular. He wasn't looking directly at them, but his eyes had flicked toward Claire's direction with a quiet sharpness. His face was thoughtful, disturbed. His name, she would later learn, was Mr. Raymond Lee. For now, he simply observed and stayed silent. Nyla pulled out her phone from the small backpack tucked at her feet. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unlocked the screen. She opened the text thread marked Dad. She hesitated for a full 5 seconds, then typed, "Dad? Something feels off. The flight attendant won't give Malik water," I asked nicely. "Twice. She's ignoring us." She paused, unsure whether she was overreacting, whether she was making too much of it. But something inside her said no, something deeper than doubt, something that felt like the truth. She hit send. Across the aisle, a young blonde woman in a silk scarf requested extra snacks. Claire responded with cheerful promptness, her voice almost chirpy. The contrast stung. Malik's voice came softly beside her. "Why does she keep skipping us?" he asked. Nyla looked into his eyes, so wide, so trusting, so confused. "I don't know," she said gently, "but I'll make sure Dad knows. He'll help." She squeezed his hand. Minutes ticked by. The plane lifted into the sky with a smooth, powerful hum. Clouds floated past the window, bright and blinding in the sun. But Nyla felt the coldest she had in a long time. Then her phone buzzed. "Dad, thank you for telling me. I'll take care of it." No punctuation, no exclamation point. But Nyla knew that tone. It was the voice Samuel Robinson used when meetings went sideways, when clients crossed lines, when someone underestimated him. Her heart beat faster, but not from fear, from relief. She put the phone away, her spine straightening just a little more. Whatever was coming next, she wouldn't be facing it alone. A few rows ahead, Claire disappeared behind the curtain that separated the front galley from the passenger area. Seconds later, the intercom clicked on. The voice was calm, measured. Male. "Miss Claire Harding, please report to the flight deck. Immediately." The cabin went still. Nyla felt Malik sit upright beside her. Across the aisle, Mr. Raymond Lee looked up, his brows raised. From the front, Claire reappeared. Her confident posture was a fraction more rigid now, her smile noticeably absent. She walked past their row without a glance, disappearing behind the same curtain with clipped steps. For a few moments, the cabin remained suspended in quiet curiosity. Then Nyla whispered to Malik, "Dad's doing something. I think she's in trouble." Malik looked up, wide-eyed. "Really?" She nodded slowly. "Really?" As the hum of the engines filled the void, Nyla settled back in her seat. Her heart still ached, but now it beat with something else too. A sense that the silence was finally about to break. The curtain at the front of the cabin barely swayed, but to Nyla Robinson, it may as well have been the edge of a storm cloud. Behind that partition, something had changed, something that shifted the very air around them. She could feel it in the way the nearby passengers grew still, in how the man with the business suit 2 rows ahead paused mid-email to glance toward the front, his fingers suspended above the keyboard. Malik leaned close to her, whispering, "Did Dad call the pilot?" Nyla gave the tiniest nod. "I think he made someone call the pilot." And he had. Behind that quiet curtain, Claire Harding stood rigid, her usual mask of composure cracking under the weight of a voice she never expected to hear from thousands of feet below. The captain's words had been brief, direct, no debate. There was a call from JFK, from corporate, and a very specific name had been mentioned, Samuel Robinson. The name itself rang like a bell of authority. Claire had heard it before. Everyone in luxury travel had. She'd even read about him in a magazine tucked into her break room, next to an article on emerging black billionaires reshaping American business. She remembered scoffing at the time. Now her palms were sweating. "Return to service," the captain had told her. "But be aware, corporate is watching every move." As she stepped back into the aisle, she no longer carried herself with practiced elegance. Her movements were stiffer, less fluid. Her smile, when she forced it, was thin and brittle. She headed down the aisle, tray in hand, stopping at each row with mechanical pleasantries. When she finally reached row 3, Nyla and Malik's row, she paused, breath catching in her throat. The girl was watching her, quietly, not with fear, not even with anger, just with clarity. A stillness so calm it unnerved Claire more than any outburst might have. "Would you still like that water?" Claire asked, her voice a little too tight. Nyla tilted her head slightly. "Why now?" The question, simple and soft, landed like a hammer. Claire's smile twitched. Around them, passengers went still again. Conversations halted. Even the businessman across the aisle closed his laptop. "I'm sorry," Claire said. "There must have been a misunderstanding." Nyla blinked once, then spoke clearly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by those closest. "There was no misunderstanding," she said. "You skipped us, twice, and you told me we'd have to wait while you served everyone else." Claire's jaw tensed. "And now that someone important made a call, suddenly we matter?" A silence descended, thicker than before. Claire stood frozen. Her tray trembled slightly in her grip. She looked around, searching for an escape that wouldn't come. Then from the row behind Nyla, a voice spoke, gentle, elderly, but firm. "She's right." Claire turned. Mr. Raymond Lee had leaned slightly forward. his eyes no longer passive. I saw what happened. You served the couple in row 2 long before beverage service officially began. You ignored these children, repeatedly, and you did it deliberately. The color drained from Claire's face. She stepped back, murmuring something barely audible, and vanished behind the curtain once more. Nyla sat perfectly still, her hands flat on her lap. Malik stared at her, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and confusion. You talked back to her, he whispered. No, Nyla said softly. I just told the truth. Across the aisle, someone clapped once, hesitantly, then twice. A few more followed. It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was enough to change the air. Meanwhile, on the ground, the situation was escalating. Samuel Robinson stood in the VIP terminal lounge of JFK International Airport, flanked by two of his most trusted legal advisors. The CEO of the airline, Richard Bennett, had just gotten off a hastily arranged call from the Department of Transportation, and his phone now buzzed endlessly with alerts. Samuel hadn't raised his voice once. He didn't need to. His presence, like always, spoke for him. I want this resolved before that aircraft lands, he said calmly, his voice the kind that didn't repeat itself. No press, no excuses, just action. Back in the sky, Ellen, the younger flight attendant, approached Nyla and Malik quietly, glancing over her shoulder to ensure Claire wasn't watching. She knelt slightly to speak at eye level. I'm sorry for what happened, she said, her voice soft. You didn't deserve that. Malik looked at her, his lips parted as if to ask a question, but Nyla gave a small nod, gracious but reserved. Thank you, she said, but it wasn't just about us. Elena seemed to understand. She glanced around the cabin where other passengers were watching with growing discomfort, and perhaps for the first time, recognition. Things are changing, she whispered. I think your dad, he's already set something in motion. Nyla turned her gaze toward the window. Clouds stretched like silk over a golden horizon, but in her reflection, she saw more than sky. She saw her brother, she saw herself, and she saw something larger than either of them, a fight that had found them, and a voice, hers, that had chosen not to remain silent. The landing gear thumped against the tarmac with a muted jolt, but the real weight hadn't yet dropped. Inside the cabin of Flight 3260, tension hung like mist, thin, nearly invisible, yet heavy enough to press on every shoulder. Conversations were hushed, stolen glances exchanged. The hum of the engines was soon joined by something sharper. The unmistakable click of phones being unlocked, passengers subtly recording, as if they sensed something was about to unfold. And it was. Nyla sat upright, her hands resting gently atop Malik's. He leaned against her, still quiet, still thoughtful, but calmer now, anchored by his sister's presence. Do you think she'll come back? He whispered. Nyla shook her head slowly. I think someone else will. The seatbelt sign pinged off. There was the familiar rustle of passengers collecting their things. But no one stood. Not really. It was as if the entire front of the plane was holding its breath. The cabin door clicked open. From the front, just past the curtain, emerged the captain. His presence alone startled a few passengers, but when he stepped aside, everything stopped. Samuel Robinson entered the aircraft. He did not speak. He did not scan the crowd. He did not need to. In his tailored charcoal coat, with a navy pocket square folded with quiet precision, Samuel exuded a quiet, bone-deep authority that stilled every whisper. His posture was calm, but each step felt like a drumbeat. Behind him came Richard Bennett, CEO of the airline, visibly flustered, red-faced, and breathing as though he had run. Two senior airline executives trailed like shadows, briefcases in hand and expressions tight with anxiety. The hush in the cabin fractured into stunned murmurs. That's Samuel Robinson, someone whispered. Oh my God, he came here himself. Nyla and Malik didn't move. They simply looked up and saw the man they knew not just as a businessman, not as the name that moved markets, but as their father, their protector. He approached them slowly, his expression unreadable to all but his children. Nyla recognized the storm held tight behind his eyes. Malik reached instinctively for his sister's hand. When Samuel reached their row, he knelt slightly. just enough so that his eyes met theirs. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "I'm proud of you, both of you." Malik's lip trembled. "I thought maybe nobody would believe us." Samuel turned to him fully. "They'll believe now." And then he stood. He turned to face Richard Bennett, who had just arrived at the edge of the aisle, pulling at his collar like it had suddenly grown too tight. "Mr. Robinson," Bennett began, voice thin, "let me say first how deeply sorry we are." Samuel raised a hand, silencing him. "You allowed an employee under your authority," he said, voice even, "to humiliate my children, repeatedly, not through a mistake, but through willful discrimination." The words dropped like stones. "I raised them to be respectful, measured. You raised someone in your system who believed two well-mannered black children in first class couldn't possibly belong." Gas flickered around the cabin. Richard Bennett shifted awkwardly, his words fumbling. We're taking the matter very seriously. Miranda has been placed on immediate administrative leave, and we are prepared to—" Samuel's voice cut clean through. "No more internal fixes, no sealed apologies. You will issue a public statement before this plane empties, or you will lose more than just a job title." The executives behind Bennett visibly stiffened. One began typing furiously into a phone. Another turned pale. Passengers were now openly filming. What had begun as a minor injustice had become something far larger, and no one, not even the airline, could contain it anymore. "I will not have my children be your learning curve," Samuel said. "This ends now." Just then, Claire Harding appeared from the front galley. Her face was pale, her uniform slightly rumpled. She stopped short at the sight of Samuel, her eyes darting between him and Nyla. He didn't look at her. Instead, Samuel turned to Nyla. "Would you like to say anything?" She rose. The cabin was silent again, this time with reverence. Standing in her seat row, Nyla looked directly at Claire. "I asked you nicely," she said. "I said please," more than once. Claire blinked, the shame creeping up her cheeks in waves. "You served everyone but us. You looked through us. And now you want to be sorry because someone important showed up." Nyla's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "We didn't want a show. We just wanted respect." Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. Nyla turned to face the cabin. Her voice steadied. "I'm not the only one this has happened to. Maybe others didn't have someone like my dad to come and fix it. Maybe they didn't get cameras or apologies or executives at their seats." She glanced back at her father. "But we do. And now you all know what it looks like." Then calmly she sat. The silence in the cabin broke with applause. Not thunderous, but real and growing. From a few rows back, Raymond Lee, the older gentleman, stood halfway, raising a hand. "I saw it, all of it," he said, "and I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry, Nyla." She nodded at him softly with grace far beyond her years. Claire, trembling, slowly stepped back, retreating down the aisle until she disappeared behind the curtain once more. Richard Bennett turned to Samuel. "We'll issue the statement immediately," he said. "Public, transparent, and we'll begin a systemic review of all frontline protocols." Samuel gave a single nod. "I expect to see it in writing within the hour." He turned to his children, placing one hand on each shoulder. "Let's go home," he said. The doors of Flight 3260 had barely shut behind them when the first headline dropped. CEO Samuel Robinson confronts airline in first-class discrimination incident. And then another. 12-year-old black girl denied water in first class. Father's response shakes airline leadership. Within the hour, Nyla Robinson's name was trending on every major platform. Not because she'd shouted, not because she'd wept, but because she had spoken calmly with the kind of quiet power that made people listen. Inside the sleek black SUV parked outside the private terminal, Nyla sat beside her father, her hand still holding Malik's. The city blurred past the tinted windows, but her thoughts were far from New York's skyline. "Is it always like this?" she asked softly. "When people finally see what they've ignored?" Samuel turned to her. "No," he said. "Most of the time, they still look away. But sometimes, when the moment's right, when the voice is clear, they have no choice but to listen." Malik, still a little stunned, blinked. Did we do something big? Samuel smiled faintly. Bigger than you think. By morning, it wasn't just news anchors discussing the flight. Educators were assigning Nyla's words in classrooms. Civil rights leaders were citing her courage. Other parents began sharing their children's untold stories of discrimination, of the quiet, insidious kind, the kind that doesn't scream but slices slowly. And most notably, a podium was being prepared outside the headquarters of Summit Airways. The press had been calling since dawn, but it wasn't Samuel they wanted to hear from. It was Nyla. The Robinson family arrived at the site just before noon. A crowd had already gathered. Journalists, supporters, even off-duty airline employees. Signs waved quietly. Children deserve dignity. Justice has no age. We hear you, Nyla. Camera shutters flickered as Nyla emerged from the car, wearing a navy blue sweater and jeans. Simple, honest, like her. Samuel gave her hand a gentle squeeze. You don't have to do this, baby. She looked up at him, composed, grounded. I know, but I want to. With Malik beside her, she approached the podium. The noise stilled. Then she spoke. My name is Nyla Robinson, she began, voice clear but soft. And I never thought asking for a glass of water could change anything. But it did. She paused, eyes moving slowly across the crowd. Yesterday, someone looked at my skin and decided I didn't belong. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just asked nicely, and I was told no. Not once, not twice, but enough times that even my little brother began to wonder if we had done something wrong. A flicker of emotion passed across her face, but she didn't falter. We didn't. We did nothing wrong, and we were never invisible. Someone just chose not to see us. A hush fell so complete you could hear the wind brushing through camera mics. I'm speaking now because I don't want any other child to sit where I sat and wonder if they're the problem. They're not. You're not. And you shouldn't have to wait for someone powerful to stand beside you before people pay attention. Behind her, Samuel bowed his head, his throat tightening. I didn't want this attention, she continued, but now that it's here, I want to use it. Not just for me, but for Malik, for every kid who's ever been told to wait while others are served first. We all deserve to be seen, to be heard, to be treated like we belong, because we do. The moment she finished, the crowd erupted, not with noise, but with standing silence. A respect so raw, so real, that even reporters lowered their cameras in reverence. Later that night, Nyla's speech aired in full across every major network. She was compared to Ruby Bridges, Amanda Gorman, and even Claudette Colvin. But the truth was, she didn't want to be compared. She just wanted to be believed. That same evening, the CEO of Summit Airways released a full-length apology broadcast live. We failed 2 children, and in doing so, we exposed a deeper failure within our system. We will be launching a new program. First Eyes First, visibility, equality, and respect in the skies. And we have asked Miss Nyla Robinson to advise us directly on its development. And with that, Nyla's name was no longer just trending, it was making history. But in the quiet of their living room that night, away from the flash of cameras and digital praise, Nyla curled up on the couch next to Malik. He looked up at her, solemn. Do you think it'll change anything? She thought for a moment, then said quietly, it might not change everything, but maybe now they'll think twice before ignoring someone again. Malik nodded slowly. I'm glad you spoke up. She reached over and pulled him close. I'm glad you were there. And in that quiet, flickering moment of warmth and resolve, a truth settled over both of them. The fight for dignity had many voices, but all it ever took was one brave child to start. In the boardroom on the 47th floor of Summit Airways headquarters, the mood was unusually quiet for a Monday morning. No slideshows, no applause, no coffee-stained charts filled with false optimism, only the stillness of consequence. CEO Richard Bennett sat at the head of the long walnut table, his tie slightly askew. Around him, his executive team shuffled papers, avoided eye contact, and reviewed draft after draft of policy reforms that, until last week, none of them believed would be necessary. But now the world was watching. First Eyes First, the new equality training initiative, was being launched ahead of schedule. Every frontline employee, from gate agents to senior flight attendants, would undergo cultural accountability training. The initiative would include real passenger testimonials, case studies, and one very specific video clip. Nyla Robinson's press conference. It wasn't a campaign, it was a reckoning. Meanwhile, across the city, Nyla sat at the kitchen table with a mug of peppermint tea cupped in both hands. It wasn't just her name in the headlines anymore. It was her face. Magazines, talk shows, activist panels, and with that came something new. Backlash. The internet, once ablaze with praise, had begun to fracture. Some comments were filled with admiration. She's only 12 and already changing the world. We need more Nyla Robinsons. But others cut colder. It was just a drink of water. Why all the drama? Sounds like her father bought her a platform. Another spoiled kid playing the race card. Samuel stood behind her, phone in hand, scanning headlines. When he noticed her expression, he moved closer. "Don't read them," he said gently. Nyla looked up. "I want to know what they're saying." "Then know this too," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Most people don't like the mirror when it shows them what they ignored." She gave a slow nod, lips pressed tight. "I didn't ask to be anyone's symbol," she whispered. "I just wanted a glass of water." The next day, the first official session of the airline's employee reform program began, and the woman seated in the front row, hands folded tightly in her lap, was Elena Torres, the younger flight attendant from that flight. She had been the only crew member who had tried to help, the only one who hesitated. Now she sat among colleagues who shifted uneasily as the training began. Nyla's video played on screen, and silence thickened the air. The instructor paused. "Before we begin, I'd like to ask one question." She gestured toward the screen, where a still image of Nyla, hand on the podium, eyes firm, lingered. "What do you see?" A long silence followed. Finally, Elena raised her hand. "I see a child who waited to be treated like a person," she said softly, "and we all made her wait too long." The room remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, the kind that listens. Elsewhere, Claire Harding sat across from two HR investigators. Her uniform had been replaced with a plain blouse and blazer. No wings on her chest, no authority in her posture. She looked tired, hardened, and still unapologetic. "She was rude," Claire insisted. "You weren't there. That girl had an attitude from the start." The lead investigator, a former civil rights compliance officer, met her gaze evenly. "We have multiple witness statements confirming otherwise, including video footage. This isn't about attitude. This is about how you treated her. How did you see her?" Claire's face flushed. "So now we lose our jobs for one mistake?" "No," the investigator said quietly. "You lose your job for a pattern." Claire said nothing. Back at home, Nyla found herself facing an unexpected invitation. A handwritten envelope arrived in the afternoon mail. It was from a private girls' school across town, an invitation to speak at their Youth Courage Assembly. Nyla turned it over in her hands, unsure. Samuel read the note with a soft exhale. "It's starting," he said. "What is?" "You're not just a voice now," he replied. "You're a light, and people will follow it." "But what if I say the wrong thing?" He knelt beside her, eye level. "Then say it anyway. Speak from where it hurts, and it'll always be right." That night, Nyla returned to her room early. She didn't journal, didn't scroll. Instead, she pulled out her school backpack, the same one she carried on the flight, and carefully tucked the invitation inside. She sat in silence for a long time, her eyes on the window where stars blinked softly above the city skyline. Then she whispered into the quiet, "Let them listen. I'm not done speaking." The auditorium was hushed, not with boredom, but with something quieter, deeper, anticipation maybe, or reverence. Rows of young girls, diverse in age and background, sat facing the small podium on the stage of St. Rose Academy's annual Youth Courage Assembly. Above the stage hung a simple banner, "When one girl speaks, the world listens." At the edge of the platform stood Nyla Robinson, hands clasped behind her back, her breathing calm but deliberate. She had chosen not to carry notes, not because she didn't prepare, but because the story she was about to share didn't live on paper. It lived in her chest. Her eyes scanned the room. She spotted a few familiar faces. Teachers, her father at the back, even Elena Torres quietly seated near the aisle. But most faces were new, and still she wasn't afraid. She took a breath, then began. Some people think courage is loud, that it roars, but I've learned sometimes courage whispers. When I asked for a glass of water on that flight, I wasn't trying to make history. I wasn't trying to make a point. I just wanted someone to see me, to see my brother, to treat us like we belonged. Her voice didn't waver, even as her words settled like echoes in the high ceilings. And when I didn't get that respect, I could have stayed silent, but I didn't. Not because I wasn't scared, I was. But if I stayed quiet, it would mean I agreed with how we were treated. She paused, eyes meeting the gaze of dozens of young girls who leaned forward, wide-eyed. And I don't agree. I never will. As she finished, the auditorium broke into a standing ovation. Not theatrical, not polite, earnest. Backstage, as Nyla stepped down from the lights, she was approached by students one by one, some in tears, some unable to form words at all. One girl, no older than 10, simply hugged her. "You made me brave," she whispered. Samuel watched from a distance, hands in pockets, his heart aching with pride. But not far from him, someone else watched too. A woman in her late 50s, seated quietly near the back, hands clutched tightly around a worn leather purse. Her name was Monica Fields, and for the past 23 years, she had kept a secret buried in silence. That night, Monica couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, flipping a spoon through cold tea. On the nearby TV, Nyla's speech replayed again, her face glowing beneath the stage lights. "She's only 12, Monica whispered aloud to no one, and she said what I couldn't." She stood, walked to a filing cabinet in the hallway, and pulled open the bottom drawer. At the very back, behind old resumes and dusty tax files, was a single envelope, sealed for years unopened. Inside were two things: a formal complaint she had written in 2001, when she was a flight attendant at Summit Airways, documenting repeated instances of discrimination on flights, was ignored by her supervisor, and a photocopy of a written response from HR that read, "Due to the absence of hard evidence, your concerns have been noted but will not be pursued." She had folded the papers away that year, swallowed the injustice, and quietly resigned 6 months later. But now the words of a 12-year-old had broken open something inside her that had long scabbed over. And this time, she wasn't going to stay quiet. The next morning, Monica requested a meeting with Summit Airways' new oversight board, the one created in response to Nyla's incident. The woman at the front desk blinked when she gave her name. "You were with us before?" "Yes," Monica replied. "But you wouldn't remember. That's sort of the point." Hours later, Monica sat in a glass-walled conference room, the envelope trembling in her hands as she slid it across the table to the internal affairs officer. "These documents are over 2 decades old," she said, "but the pattern they describe hasn't aged a day." The officer opened them slowly. His eyes widened. "There's a name in here," he said. "Claire Harding." Monica nodded. "She's been doing this a long time. I just wasn't brave enough to make them hear me." He looked up. "You are now." Across town, Nyla was helping Malik with his history homework when the doorbell rang. Samuel answered and paused at the sight of the woman on the porch. Monica introduced herself quietly. "I came to see Nyla and to thank her." Minutes later, they sat together on the couch, generations apart, but united by something deeper than time. "You don't know me," Monica said gently, "but I've known people like you my whole life, and you gave me the courage to speak out, finally." She handed Nyla a folded note. "You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for all of us who couldn't. And now, I'm speaking too." Nyla held the note carefully, as though it might dissolve under the weight of its truth. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't think anyone was listening that long ago." Monica smiled sadly. We were. We were just too afraid to echo back." That night, Samuel sat beside Nyla as she reread the note for the third time. "Dad," she said suddenly, "do you think this means something bigger is coming?" He nodded slowly. "I think it already has." The letterhead was unmistakable, silver ink embossed with the wings of Summit Airways. But the tone of the message was something entirely different. You are hereby requested to appear before the Summit Internal Ethics Council for a formal inquiry into your conduct during Flight 3260. This proceeding will be recorded and reviewed by external accountability monitors. Attendance is mandatory. Claire Harding stared at the envelope as if it were a trap. The words were surgical, cold. They didn't offer space for denial or delay. After 2 decades in uniform, Claire had survived dozens of internal probes, most of which never amounted to more than an email or a whispered slap on the wrist. She had always known how to maneuver through the cracks. But this wasn't a crack. This was a full breach. And this time, the walls were listening. 2 floors below the boardroom where Claire would be questioned, a press team was quietly setting up lights, microphones, and cameras. This was no ordinary hearing. It had been ordered open to public transparency. And seated among the small audience of observers were 3 unexpected guests. Nyla Robinson, arms crossed, watching every detail. Monica Fields, seated beside him, envelope in her lap. And Nyla, serene but focused, flanked by a camera crew preparing to live stream the session across multiple platforms. The Ethics Council, composed of 5 members from both Summit and independent organizations, began with a simple statement. This inquiry is not a performance. It is not a PR gesture. It is a pursuit of truth on behalf of passengers whose dignity was denied. Claire entered through the side door, her heels unusually muted on the carpet. She sat, no opening smile, no practiced air. She knew better now. The questioning began with protocol. Ms. Harding, how long have you worked in commercial aviation? 23 years. How many formal complaints have been filed against you by passengers? 3. We have 8 on record. I was never formally disciplined. That's why we're here now. Claire swallowed hard. Then came the footage. Nyla's quiet voice. The repeated requests for water. The long pauses. The cold refusals. And finally, Claire's expression in the video paused at the precise moment she turned away from the children, dismissing them. Would you say your body language was professional in this moment? The council chair asked. Claire shifted. I was busy. The cabin was active. I made judgment calls. Judgment, echoed another council member. Based on what? Silence. From the back row, Nyla sat still, her hands folded. She didn't flinch, not even as Claire's eyes for the first time flicked toward her. Why did you refuse service multiple times when service had already begun? Another asked. Claire opened her mouth, but before she could speak, the council produced a new document. Fresh, unredacted. It was Monica's 2001 complaint. The air changed. Ms. Fields filed this over 2 decades ago. It names you directly. Claire blinked. Do you deny the claims? She faltered. I don't remember this. But it happened, Monica said quietly from the audience. You did the same thing to a mother and her daughter. Only difference was, back then, there weren't cameras. The weight of those words landed like thunder. Claire's composure slipped. Her shoulders sagged. The council spoke again. We have a pattern, documented, witnessed, and now publicly recognized. You will be suspended indefinitely pending the outcome of this inquiry. A full report will be made public within 30 days. Claire nodded once. For the first time, she didn't argue. Outside the chamber, the sun was just beginning to set over the glass facade of Summit headquarters. Journalists surrounded the front steps as Nyla exited, hand in hand with her father. Microphones were extended. Cameras flashed. But it was Monica who stepped forward first. For years, I told myself it wasn't my place to speak. That silence was safer, but silence lets someone else keep harming. Today, because a 12-year-old girl stood up, I finally did too. The crowd fell quiet as Nyla stepped beside her. Her voice was soft, but unshakable. This isn't just about one person or one flight. It's about the idea that some people's discomfort is treated as more important than other people's dignity. That ends now. The moment was broadcast live. Viewers surged past 1 million, and among them were thousands of current and former airline employees watching, processing, reconsidering. That evening, as the city turned to night, Nyla returned home to something unexpected. A letter had arrived. No return address. Inside was a single page, typed, You don't know me, but I've watched you speak. And I want you to know something. I used to work for Summit. I left after being told not to hire too many diverse cabin crew because it would make first-class passengers uncomfortable. I never said anything. I was afraid. But now because of you, I'm ready to speak. Let me know how I can help. Let's clean this thing out, together. Beneath the message was a name, Gabriel Carter, a former HR supervisor. Samuel read the letter twice, then folded it. You're pulling people out of the shadows, Nyla, he said. She looked up from where she sat on the couch. I didn't mean to. But you are, he said. That's the difference between attention and influence. You didn't ask for a spotlight, but you earned the right to direct it. She nodded slowly. Then she whispered, I think I'm ready. Ready for what? She looked up, eyes fierce with clarity. To lead something real, not just speak, act, build. Samuel smiled. Not the fatherly kind, the kind that recognized a beginning. A legacy is being born. 2 days later, Summit Airways held its first televised Justice Forum, co-hosted by an independent civil rights coalition. On stage sat Monica Fields, Gabriel Carter, two passengers from Nyla's flight, and at the center, Nyla Robinson. She didn't wear a blazer. She didn't hold prepared notes. She wore her truth, and it was more than enough. The studio lights were relentless, cool, bright, and unforgiving. But Nyla Robinson sat unmoved beneath their glow, hands steady, eyes forward. At just 12, she had become the face of something far larger than herself. No longer just the girl who had asked for water. Now she was the child who had asked the nation, why do we let this keep happening? Tonight was different. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't a press conference. It was a confrontation. A nationally televised forum hosted by the American Ledger, one of the most watched evening shows in the country. The topic, institutional bias in air travel. But the real headline had already written itself. Nyla Robinson unveils the Unity Initiative, an industry-wide reform plan. The name stood for Unconscious Bias Training Nationwide, Passenger Dignity Protocols, Internal Whistleblower Protection, Truth-Based Transparency Reports, Youth Advisory Council for Frontline Equity. The plan wasn't just a set of suggestions, it was a roadmap, and it scared people. On the other side of the table sat Elliot Warren, Senior Policy Advisor at the National Aviation Association. Gray-haired, sharp-suited, and deeply uncomfortable. The industry doesn't need a child telling us how to run our operations, he had told producers off camera. It needs efficiency, compliance, not emotion. But now, live on air, his smile was strained, his voice was measured. With all due respect, Nyla, he said, your proposal sounds like it's built on passion, not pragmatism. Reform is complex, costly. Your Unity initiative, while well-meaning, could jeopardize operational flow and impose unrealistic mandates on airline staff. Nyla didn't blink. I'm 12, she said, but I know what it feels like to be looked at like a problem before I even speak. That didn't come from passion. That came from the seat I was in. The host leaned in. Mr. Warren, what part of the initiative do you find most unrealistic? The Youth Council, Warren replied quickly. We can't have minors dictating policy. I'm not dictating policy, Nyla said quietly. I'm reminding you who your policies affect. A ripple moved through the studio. Across the country, millions were watching. Teachers, pilots, single mothers, CEOs. Some in admiration, some in resistance, but all are listening. In the wings, Samuel Robinson stood with his arms folded, jaw set. He'd spent his life learning how to dismantle bias quietly, with numbers and contracts. But his daughter was rewriting the playbook, with truth. And truth, when spoken plainly, had a way of cutting through bureaucracy like fire through frost. Back on stage, the moderator shifted. Nyla, what would you say to those who think you're being used? Pushed into the spotlight by your father or activists behind the scenes? I'd say they don't know me, Nyla replied, her voice calm. Because if they did, they'd know that asking for justice isn't a performance, it's a promise. And I'm not here because someone made me speak. I'm here because staying quiet hurts more. She turned slightly toward the camera. There are thousands of kids who fly every year. some for the first time, some with dreams in their bags. And too many of them, especially if they look like me, learn early that they have to shrink to fit into someone else's comfort. I'm not shrinking anymore. The host, visibly moved, paused, then asked the question the audience had been waiting for. What do you want from the people watching tonight? Nyla drew in a breath. I want them to believe that dignity is not complicated. It should never depend on how expensive your ticket is, or how much melanin you carry, or whether your last name sounds American enough. I want them to stop saying, that's not my job, and start asking, what if that were my child? After the taping ended, applause filled the studio. Not polite, not obligatory, but real. Still, as Nyla stepped off stage, Samuel saw the shadow cross her eyes. You okay? He asked gently. She nodded, but then said, I didn't expect it to feel this heavy. Samuel crouched so they were eye to eye. That's what happens when your truth touches someone else's lie. She looked at him solemn. Did I say too much? You said just enough. Back at Summit headquarters, the atmosphere had shifted. 2 new board members had resigned, citing internal misalignment with a new cultural vision. But behind closed doors, the real battle was beginning. A cluster of executives huddled inside a high-security meeting room, whispering over the implications of Nyla's unity proposal. It's too fast, said one. She's too young, said another. This could cost us everything, muttered a third. Then came the voice of Marissa Kendall, the newly appointed Chief Inclusion Officer, someone who had once been silenced for speaking out, but was now appointed directly by Samuel Robinson himself. We're not debating a child's feelings, she said coldly. We're staring down the truth of an entire generation. Either we follow or we fall. No one replied. The following morning, headlines erupted. Warren's comments sparked backlash after televised exchange with Nyla Robinson. Unity initiative gains momentum. Airlines across Europe signal support. Former flight staff begin speaking out about past discrimination cases. The press had shifted. The public had shifted. And the institutions were now lagging. Nyla returned to school to find her locker covered in notes, handwritten letters, folded drawings, messages like, thank you for making us visible. You showed them what we always knew. You made me brave. But tucked between 2 notebooks was something else. A note scrawled in careful cursive. You're doing more than fighting racism. You're teaching the world how to listen. Anonymous staff member Summit. She read it once, then twice, then tucked it carefully into her binder. That night, as Samuel reviewed emails from several airline executives requesting meetings, Nyla sat quietly at the dining table, pen in hand. She was drafting a list, not of demands, not of complaints, but of questions. What does it mean to be seen before you're spoken to? Why are rules called universal if they don't protect everyone? What would flying feel like if everyone boarded with dignity? She wrote each one carefully, thoughtfully, and beside them, she left space for answers the world had yet to give. The rotunda of the United States Capitol stood like a monument to voices that had changed the course of a nation. Its dome gleamed in the morning light, framed by marble and memory. But on this day, all eyes were not on the building. They were on a 12-year-old girl walking steadily up its steps. Nyla Robinson, in a simple navy dress and black flats, flanked by her father Samuel and Monica Fields on either side. Behind them walked Elena Torres, Gabriel Carter, and a new generation of airline workers who had once been afraid to speak. Today they had been invited to witness something unprecedented. The Aviation Passenger Dignity and Equity Act, nicknamed the Robinson Bill, was being introduced to Congress, and Nyla, by unanimous request, would deliver its first address. Inside the chamber, silence reigned as Nyla took her place behind the podium. There were no teleprompters, no polished speechwriters, just her truth, and a room filled with lawmakers, reporters, and flight crew from across the country. Her voice, when it came, was steady as stone. Good morning. My name is Nyla Robinson. I am 12 years old, and I am here today not because I asked for power, but because I once asked for water and was denied. That denial revealed something bigger, a truth too many have lived and too few have acknowledged. that our systems designed to move people still don't see all people equally. She paused. You could hear pens stop moving. I was told by some that I was too young to speak, but I've learned that age doesn't determine wisdom. Experience does. And I have lived, like millions of others, the experience of being looked at with suspicion before I even say hello. So we built the Unity Initiative, and today that work continues in this room. This bill will require national training standards, passenger dignity reporting systems, and youth advisory panels within every major airline. But more than policies, we are asking for principles, for every person in a uniform to remember that the passenger in front of them is a person first, not a risk, not a disruption, not a statistic, a person. You don't need wings on your chest to help people fly. You just need the courage to see them. There were no standing ovations allowed inside the chamber. But when Nyla stepped down from the podium, the entire room rose to its feet. The vote to pass the preliminary version of the bill cleared its first stage within 3 days. Major airlines that once resisted have now issued public statements of support, not because they'd changed their minds, but because the world had changed its eyes. The Unity framework, once viewed as impossible, became the standard for domestic airline reform. Summit Airways announced the establishment of the Nyla Robinson Fellowship, a mentorship and accountability program designed to train the next generation of inclusive aviation leaders. Nyla's response? I'll help design it, but I won't be the face of it. 2 weeks later, the program's first cohort assembled at JFK Airport. 20 children ages 9 to 1 were selected from schools across the country. Each one of them had once been overlooked, misjudged, or silenced. Now they were being asked, what would flying look like if you were in charge? Nyla stood quietly in the back, watching. She wasn't giving a speech. She didn't need to. The next voices had already found the mic. That evening, back at home, Nyla sat in her bedroom window, legs tucked beneath her. The city shimmered below, soft and vast. Malik sat beside her, now more curious than shy. Do you think people are going to remember this? He asked. She thought for a moment. Maybe not all the names or the speeches, but maybe they'll remember what it felt like to see someone stand up and not back down. Malik nodded. That's what I'll remember. She turned to him. You know, I think one day it's going to be you up there. He raised a brow. Talking to Congress? No, she smiled. Maybe flying the plane. They laughed together, a sound that had once been muted by injustice. Now it rose freely. Weeks passed, then months. Nyla turned 13. She declined dozens of interviews, refused a book deal, politely declined a statue proposal at the airline's training center. When asked why, she answered simply, this isn't about being remembered, it's about making sure people aren't forgotten. But she did agree to one thing, a single plaque installed at Gate C7 at JFK International Airport, the very terminal where her journey began. The inscription read, in honor of Nyla Robinson. She asked for a glass of water and gave a nation its reflection. Let every passenger be seen. Let every child be heard. Let dignity fly with us. One quiet morning, Nyla returned to that gate. No cameras, no speeches, just her, a journal, and a pair of sneakers that squeaked softly against the polished floor. She sat near the window, watched planes take off, listened to the soft hum of announcements, and in the reflection of the glass, she saw something that made her heart settle. A new flight attendant, young, kind-eyed, kneeling to hand a bottle of water to a black boy in a hoodie. No cameras, no press, just one small kindness, happening without anyone asking. Nyla smiled, closed her journal, and whispered to herself, maybe this is what change looks like. Then she stood and walked forward, not to the stage, not to the cameras, but to the gate. Because for her, it was never about rising above the sky. It was about making sure everyone else could rise with her. Moral of the story, sometimes change begins with the smallest request, a whisper, a question, a hand raised not in defiance, but in dignity. Nyla Robinson never asked to become a symbol. She asked for a glass of water. But in doing so, she uncovered something far deeper, a system built not just on policies, but on perceptions, on the quiet ways society decides who is worthy of respect and who is not. Her story reminds us that injustice doesn't always arrive with shouting. Often it comes with silence, with being overlooked, with was told to wait when others were already being served. And yet it is in those quiet moments, when no one is watching, when no cameras are rolling, that courage is born. Not the loud, explosive kind, but the steady kind. The kind that teaches others not just how to speak, but how to listen. Through her voice, Nyla showed the world that age does not define wisdom, and silence does not equal peace. It's possible to challenge institutions without hate, to demand better, not for vengeance, but for visibility. She taught us that speaking up is not about ego, it's about empathy. And that true leadership isn't found in titles or stages. It's found in those who see pain and decide not to look away. May her story remind us all, respect is not a privilege. Dignity is not earned. They are birthrights. And the moment we stop defending them for the most vulnerable among us, we risk losing them for ourselves.